The modern world is about uprooting and destabilization, both personal, social, but also in terms of beliefs. The first one that comes to mind is redemption, which is a very difficult word, but essentially redemption is a form of release. There are accounts from the 17th century of votaries who actually talk about putting their tongue into Jesus's mouth and so on. I mean, it sometimes takes very overtly sexual overtones. Love demands above all time, effort, the virtues of listening, the virtues of tolerance, the virtues of patience. The absolutely key point here is that love involves displacement.
Do you also attach some kind of an epistemic significance to the idea of love, or is it just ontological?
I totally oppose the idea of love as union. Love is a dialogical relationship between two people. We do fetishize, obviously, romantic love. It doesn't always have to be through a person.
Modern love is deeply entangled with individualism and consumerist culture. So in what ways do you think has capitalism reshaped what we expect from love?
If you look at the relationship of parents to children currently, I mean, there has never been a time, to the best of my knowledge, in Western history, when children have been regarded as more important. In fact, I would use the word sacred. The mere fact that love has been regarded as indefinable is itself another social development that's occurred in the last 200 years. If only life would be long enough, we would be studying everything, as it were, all the time.
Love may be the most familiar word in the world, and yet perhaps the most conceptually unsteady. Cultures have sung it, feared it, ritualized it. Religions have elevated it to a cosmic force. Philosophers have treated it as both a metaphysical scandal and a moral horizon. Across millennia, love has served as a myth of origin, a promise of destiny, and the fragile thread that binds individual lives to something larger than themselves. And yet, for all its ubiquity, what exactly is love? Is it an emotion, an attachment, a metaphysical longing, a cultural construction, a spiritual discipline, or, as our guest today has argued, a search for ontological rootedness? To help us think through these tensions, we are joined by philosopher Simon May, whose work has shaped some of the most provocative contemporary debates on love. Welcome, Professor, to Dark Matter, Bright Minds.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be with you.
Thank you, Professor. Before we, move towards definitions or theories, and I want to linger on the phenomenon itself. How it appears to us and why it overwhelms us. And Professor, love seems to occupy almost a quasi-sacred place in contemporary culture, whether in cinema, literature, therapy, or even political rhetoric. So, why do you think it holds this almost mythic authority in modern life?
Well, I should just preface by saying I don't think it just holds this authority in modern life. Clearly it was extremely prevalent in the ancient world. For example, in the Western ancient world, it was very prevalent in Greece. Homer's Iliad is very much about a man who falls in love with a woman, a married woman. Many of the Roman poets, write about love. Ovid, Lucretius. The Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible is centrally about love. But why do I think it's so venerated in the modern world? My intuition about that, which is very closely linked to what I think love is, and you've just given it a very brief introduction, is that because I think love is a search in some sense for groundedness in a world that we supremely value, not in any old world, so to speak. I think that in the modern world, by which I mean the Western world, so really all I'm competent to talk about, the Western world since the Industrial Revolution, since the 18th century, or perhaps even since the 17th century, when, axiomatic belief in God began to be badly shaken. And in a sense, the anchors that humanity had, both social, metaphysical, religious, and so on, began to be shaken. I mean, the Industrial Revolution uprooted people from the countryside, created these huge cities. It dragged people off the land where, even if they didn't own the land, they'd been for centuries. and
Mm.
children took over from parents and so on. So basically, in one word, the modern world is about uprooting and destabilization, both personal, social, but also in terms of beliefs. I mean, if you no longer believe, if God as the creator of the world and as the orderer of things is no longer axiomatically believed in, that is a very unsettling change.
Mm.
And I think that the tremendous priority we attach to love, in some sense, falls out of that, because I believe love is a way of seeking groundedness.
Mm.
Needless to say, the search for groundedness is going to be on if all the old ways of being grounded get destabilized. And
Mm.
and I think that this search for groundedness in particular has devolved to the search for groundedness through the couple, through one other
Mm.
person in whom we sort of easily tend to seek everything that we lost in all those ways I just talked about. So, the companionship of an extended family, of society, the belief
Mm.
in some sort of transcendent, supreme good that can be sought through love, which I believe it can be, but it's a tremendous burden, obviously, to place on relationships. And all the things you mentioned. So, in fact, you mentioned everything, I think, from the from intimacy to a metaphysical search and so on. I think in a sense we're still looking for those things, but we're looking for those things in a very different place, namely above
Mm.
all through the romantic erotic relationship.
First, I would get into it in more depth, the idea of
Yeah.
groundedness. But before that, I want to unpack it slightly slowly. Often when we talk about love, we smuggle in centuries of inherited metaphors: union, destiny, soulmates, homecoming, etc. What do you think are the most persistent cultural assumptions about love that you think we carry without noticing it all?
Well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind, I think there are quite a
Hmm.
few, but the first one that comes to mind is redemption, which is
Hmm.
a very difficult word. But essentially, redemption is a form of release from suffering and hardship. It's a form of not only release, but in some sense, a making good. It's a reward. It's not
Hmm.
just, so to speak, getting out of the jail of wherever you were. It's also some form of higher existence that comes through the suffering and through the release from suffering. And I would say that that would be the first thing that would come to mind. That's a very old trope,
Hmm.
and that yeah, and that we still very much expect, in some sense, love to do. So, for example, when we meet or hope to meet the ideal person, whoever that is, um,
Hmm.
we hope that through that there will be some kind of release from the restrictions, from the you know hardships of a previous life, where even if or our life previously, where even if you know life still continues to be in many ways very difficult, the
Hmm.
relationship will be like a safe harbor into which, where we can, so to speak, dock every
Hmm.
every evening or whenever we, at any time. And that in that safe harbor, there will be a release from the tedium, not just suffer, I mean, also suffering that comes from tedium. So there's
Hmm.
going to be a form of excitation that love has always sought. Maybe that's the other thing, but that's very much related. I mean, clearly, when
Hmm.
you read the great love stories, not just romantic love stories like Paris and Helen and so on, but, the tremendous love for God, for example, that we read about in so
Hmm.
many religious accounts, often in extremely
Hmm.
sexual terms. I mean, there are accounts
Hmm.
from the 17th century of votaries who actually talk about putting their tongue into Jesus's mouth and so on. I mean, it sometimes takes very overtly sexual overtones. So I think that that this tremendous sense of excitation through love is another continuing, and those two are linked.
Professor, in your work, you've defined love as a longing for ontological rootedness through another. And before we unpack the implications, first of all, some people would argue that the self, the modern self especially, is quite fluid, constructed, and contingent. So if the self itself is not fixed, can love truly seek a rootedness through the other, or seek an essence at all if the essence itself is not fixed?
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, of course, there are many theories of what the self is, but if we assume that there is an element of plurality and unfixedness and even uncenteredness to the self, wouldn't that particularly argue for the experience, the search for the experience for precisely something that is anchored and that is, in some sense, fixed? So I don't think that contradicts the search. I think perhaps it even motivates the search, that we want to find a place in the world, or a place in a world that we greatly value. I mean, it needn't be this world. Some people look to a future paradise, a future heaven, some place. You mentioned in your introduction the idea of transcendence, that there would be some form of transcendence beyond this world, which is the real home. That's another metaphor I used, for which we're aiming. And so I think I don't think that conceptions of the self as, in some sense disaggregated as plural and as lacking a center in any way militate against this, maybe even on the contrary.
But I want to probably, then in this case, I want to share like my own personal
Yeah,
phenomenology of love, the way I experience it, because I often experience it as something heavy rather than reassuring. Its intensity kind of frightens me a little. I'm not because it wounds, but because it feels like it might compromise my sense of freedom. Milan Kundera and Unbearable Lightness of Being, he speaks of, heavy people and or heaviness and lightness, and
yes.
I often find myself drawn to lightness, to mobility, and resisting the weight that love could bring. So how would your idea of grounding kind of account for someone who experiences love in this way, not as stabilizing but as an existential weight, perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are a couple of points I would make. I better make them before I forget them. I mean, one is that the fact that you and, I mean, I share some of those points and have shared them many times in my life, um, have those kinds of anxieties can can really be a function precisely of the stakes you see in it. So the more important it is, I mean, maybe that's not contradicting the desire for some kind of, you know, perfect harbor, as it were, to come into. The problem is that it's so difficult to find, and it's so demanding when you get there. I mean, it demands such a long term, such a sustained commitment, and such a, love
Yes.
demands above all time,
Yeah.
effort,
Mm.
the virtues of listening, the virtues of
Yes.
tolerance, the virtues of patience,
Mm.
something that perhaps we're a
Mm.
little lacking today, in the kind of, very fast moving world we have, and our impatience for satisfaction. But so I don't think, again, that contradicts. In fact, it kind of comes, I mean, every difficult task in life, everything that demands, a lot of
Mm.
time can
Mm.
become, can can appear or can be experienced as a kind of
Mm.
prison from which you seek freedom. I completely,
Mm.
I completely get that, and I've myself experienced that. I know exactly what you mean, I think. But the
Mm.
other thing I should say about love, and this is something that maybe I sometimes regret the term I gave this, which is rootedness and so on, because it makes it sound like it's just this sort of consoling fixed place. But one thing I emphasize
Yes.
in my work again and again and again is that
Mm.
love involves displacement. So
Mm.
we leave a place in order to find our real groundedness. It
Yes.
doesn't just happen.
Mm.
And that's obviously linked to the effort involved. And I
Mm.
do say this again and again, that in a sense, we have to be repeatedly in exile. It's another word I use, which has very mythical content to it. In exile, it's exile that motivates the search for love. I think precisely if we just seek security in love, we just seek some kind of reassuring. I mean, sitting as it were in one's slippers and dressing gown in front of a warm fire, if that's what a person is for us. I don't think that that's going to get us very far, and that's not at all what I mean. And that's why I emphasize, the struggle. I mean, for example, when I mentioned before, people who see, being close to God in the afterlife and so on as the end of love. I mean, as most of the great religious figures, of course, did until religion started to decline in much of the Western world in the 18th century, beginning in the 18th century. That was a tremendously difficult business, a lifelong thing. It demanded sacrifice. It demanded tremendous hard work. There was no guarantee of it succeeding, and I think that's a very good model for love. But also, I've given illustrations of some of the sort of founding myths of the Western world. I mean, I well, not just the Western world, but so I give the examples of Odysseus in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, and of Abraham in the Bible, in Genesis. Abraham, of course, being the father of not just the Hebrew religion, not just of Judaism, but of Christianity and Islam as well. He's the father of all three monotheisms and recognized by them as such. So Abraham is commanded by God to leave his original home, where he is well established, where he is at home, cozy, rooted. His ancestors are there, his family is there. I mean, everything you would think of as rootedness, the home you've known for a long time, the people you've known for a long time, your ancestors, etc. And he's told to move to this faraway place and construct a completely new life and a new lineage, new descendants, and abandon everything. And it's a work of decades in the text. And I think these mythical texts, myth doesn't mean it's false, obviously. I'm sure you would agree with that. I mean, myth means it's a fundamental structure of human experience that's told through a story of one kind or another, and then people say, is it true? It doesn't matter if it's true. It's the fact that it's a way of giving voice to a fundamental structure that perhaps is true in some sense for all human beings in virtue of being human. And I think that illustrates love, absolutely, as I understand it. So he will find his home, his true home, the home the home where he can really become who he is, which is very key to my concept of groundedness. And as I say, in a way, I regret the term, but I can't think of a better one at the moment. So, and then the other case I could give, and there are many I could exemplify this, but I don't want to go on forever, is Odysseus, and Odysseus's journey home in the Odyssey, we call it now an Odyssey. I mean, we even speak of ourselves as, when things are difficult and we have a long journey, we call it an Odyssey, one challenge after the other to get there, and that is I interpret that as, I mean, the war's over. It's going to take another 10 years for him. Again, a long time, tremendous challenges. I mean, including challenge to life and limb. And really he only gets home with the help of a God, just like Abraham only gets to his future true home with the help of a God. I think that's very significant, a sign of how difficult it is, and of the almost supernatural help one needs, even a heroic figure like those two people. But Odysseus's return home, his pain from the separation of his true home, his nostalgia, which is the pain of separation from your home, is exactly what's motivating him to seek his original home again. And I think that when you come home, I mean, poets have written about this. T.S. Eliot has written about this wonderfully, in The Wasteland, and I mean, in a sense, Homer writes about this, which is that even if you're returning to a home rather than, which is a very old trope in love, that love is about returning to an original home, but you return in a
Mm,
new way. You don't just go back home, as it were, nothing, and you simply reclaimed your old relationship to a home. You have a completely new relationship to a home, and the journey with all its dangers is
mm,
central to that. Now, I'm talking very mythically here, but I
yeah.
personally experience, and I have to say, all my work on the philosophy of love is written completely out of personal experience. I mean, I philosophize, and I try to write it in a sort of way that will, is more general, as philosophers do. But
Mm,
basically, it's just based on personal experience. I mean, I always have to think, so what did I feel about someone, or I should say at this point, something. So my theory of love very much could
yes.
apply to art or
Yeah.
nature or many, many
Mm,
things. Um, all of which I think when we truly love them, there is this relationship. So sorry, this is a
mm,
very long answer, but the absolutely key point here is that love involves displacement, in
mm,
my understanding of it. Sometimes, really, really extremely painful displacement. It involves risk, therefore. I mean, look at
mm,
Odysseus. My God, he takes risks. I mean, he has to. He has no choice. That's the point. You're not taking risks just for the hell of it. You have no choice, right?
mm,
It's a very risky business. And so,
mm,
to get back to your point about seeking freedom, well, of course, we seek to jump off halfway through. I think precisely
mm,
if we're serious in a sense, deep down, if we realize what's
mm,
at stake, I don't think you know, it's not a sign of, can be a sign of superficiality. I don't think it is. Often it's the sign of exact
mm,
opposite. Um,
mm,
and we're just very aware of, we sense this risk and then, we'll put it off or we look for something easier. And we'll no doubt come to contemporary romantic love later. But I mean, there's a great sense today of avoiding risk. But we'll come to that. I'm sure you
mm.
want to ask about that.
Yeah, I will. First, but I wanted to bring in Ala Badiou, and when I was, because I have done, my PhD on Badiou's work, and his account on love
Yes.
also uh, is quite prominent. And but after speaking to you, I earlier I had this feeling that you people were somehow opposed to each other because you speak of a rootedness, and he speaks of rupture from
Yes.
where it starts. But now, after speaking to you, I think probably the destination seems the same. The risk and the tenacity that is required after the rupture. Uh, as how do you compare your work with Badiou's ideas of love uh, and also, you know, to me, I think your ultimate destination seems to have more of an ontological goal, whereas Badiou had also said that, after the two come together, you get a new perspective on life. So, do you also attach some kind of an epistemic significance to the idea of love, or is it just ontological?
No. And I think ontology and epistemology go together. So
Hmm.
no. So for me, and here I might be in a way similar to Badiou as well. Um,
Hmm.
I I totally oppose the idea of love as union. Um,
Hmm.
love is love is a dialogical relationship between two people. I mean, the
Hmm.
dialogical relationship doesn't keep them as separate, obviously, as they were before they were in this love relationship, but
Hmm.
it's an absolutely, and I mean, a lot of my work is on relationship. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not a self-help guide, but it's about the structure of relationship. And
Hmm.
I think that I would completely agree with Badiou that love creates, if if the relationship you know is healthily and patiently constructed, which takes a long
Yes.
time. You have to do a lot of
Yeah.
common things together, trivial things together, but also
Continuously affirmed. Yeah. Yeah.
continuously. You it
Yeah.
will it is about getting new perspectives on the world And it's about
Yeah.
finding out for each party, as it were, through the other, who they are
Mm.
and
Mm.
what it's. I keep mentioning the word destiny, or it's. I mean, again, like
Mm.
Abraham and Odysseus, they return their journey takes them to places where they become different people. I mean, they have become
Mm.
different people through the journey. The journey is motivated by love. In
Mm.
both these cases, not only for a person but for a land, right? I mean, Odysseus wants to
Mm.
return to Ithaca, to his homeland, and it's his
Exactly.
homeland and his kingship and
Mm.
his lineage and all that he
Mm.
loves, as well as Penelope, his extraordinarily faithful and loyal wife. Um, but I think I think that in fact, I would say that it's only through love that
Mm.
you can that the that who you are, and that's of course ordained by who you are, that the actual aim of your life, that the end of your life, I mean, not end in the sense of the final, but the purpose of your life,
The
the
purpose of
end
your.
toward that
Yeah.
can come into view even. That's the
Mm.
remarkable thing. I mean, we would call that inspiration as well, but that you actually find out who you are, and that you are
Mm.
able to construct that you're able it opens a trajectory towards becoming who you are
Mm.
when it's when it's real. And so in some sense, I mean, I know Badiou doesn't put it at all this way, but I think that it is absolutely fundamental to becoming, I guess nowadays it's a bit of a trivial way to put it, but you'd say living your best life. But I mean, I'm really talking about achieving your aim, your end in life, your telos, as the Greeks called it, your you know
Mm.
and and that doesn't always have to be through a person. I mean, we do fetishize obviously romantic love. It doesn't always have to be through a person. It can be through love for a vocation. It can be through
Mm.
love for a god or gods. It can be through
Mm.
love for a country, which needn't be your own.
Mm.
I mean, I've often found, and again, I don't know why that's the case, but there are certain countries. I mean, I was a professor for a year in Japan, at Tokyo
Mm.
University, and I fell in love with Japan, not just fascinated in a fascinated sense, but I actually felt, I felt sort of patriotic about Japan. It was funny. I'm not
Mm.
Japanese at all. I have absolutely no ancestral connection to Japan, whatsoever.
Mm.
But not in some other countries. So, it's a and that year had a profound effect on my whole life. I mean, I would thank goodness I did it, because, and I would never have expected it. That's the other thing. You just don't know what's going to happen. So it doesn't have to be
Mm.
for a person. And many people think these days, if they haven't found the right person, that they're in some sense their
Mm.
life's a failure. And I totally disagree with that. I think what's crucial is to have a great love, and
Mm.
it might be for philosophy, it might be for literature, it might be for sport, it might be for many things. But the key thing is,
Mm.
but it gives you this anchor in life. Again, not just a
Mm.
comforting place where you're sitting in your slippers in front of a fire. That's not at all what I'm talking about. Um, but it's a way of opening up a trajectory. Now, when there are two of you, two people, you're both doing that for each other. So you're enlarging each other's lives, but not in a selfish way. I mean, it comes in and through the relationship, in and through the love, right?
Mm.
And you are also building a life together. It's just not one of, I wouldn't call it union, because you are two separate people, and you always will be two separate people, and that's part of the magic of it. So
Mm.
with all this, I totally agree with Badiou. I mean, the only thing where I would disagree with Badiou is, or not, it's not
Mm.
disagree. I think he falls into, I mean, I have a bit of beef with modern conceptions of love, because they never really tell us what love is. They tell us what the
Mm.
conditions of love are: relationship, patience, and so on. But they don't
Mm.
say, what gets it going. So, for example, Badiou will say, as I understand, and you'll correct me, you're the Badiou scholar, but he'll say, so love is triggered in this chance encounter,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yes.
that it's triggered in that encounter isn't
Mm.
chance. So why is it triggered in that encounter and not in another encounter? I don't,
Yeah, because Badiou's,
yeah. So
his
this is
theory of
very
the
important.
event is just comes out of the blue. It's a bolt from the
No,
blue,
no,
which
but it
is
doesn't. It doesn't. So the mere fact that love is so
mm,
incredibly selective that you can
yeah.
go on your whole life trying to meet the right person or whatever it is, not because you're,
And
just avoidant or afraid at all, but precisely
mm,
because you can often the opposite, because you have such, you're so honest with yourself, or you have such fine antennae for people that you
mm,
just know that it's not right, and it's not the person. So I think he's absolutely
mm,
right about the chance, and he's absolutely right about the, that phenomenological moment of the chance.
mm, mm,
Um, but what he leaves out, he's not wrong about anything. I don't think he's wrong. I don't disagree with him actually on anything. I mean, not really, to the extent I understand
mm,
him. But
mm,
he, like nearly all contemporary theorists of love, and I mean 20th, the last 100 years,
mm,
if I can be so bold as to say that, they don't tell us what it is that love is or seeks that makes
mm,
a chance encounter, you know, a love relationship, because it's not chance that
mm,
you go, that this one that you meet X, and and maybe you're very attracted and you'll see 1,000 different fantastic qualities and what have you, but you just can't love
mm,
them. You just don't fall in love with them.
yeah.
And then you meet Y also in a chance encounter, and you do. And I think Badiou doesn't explain that. And I think almost nobody explains that, which is why,
Mm,
one of the reasons why I felt I wanted to write a philosophy of love, because I felt I had an idea. I'm not saying I'm right, but that's the thing I've put out
mm,
there. And it's got taken up
mm,
quite widely, interestingly,
mm,
often by theologians. But, I mean, obviously, many philosophers have put forward reasons, and Plato, has put forward beauty, as you know. I mean, this is now very summary. Aristotle put forward similar virtues of character, and others have put forward different
mm,
things. But there's a very strange thing in the modern era where people just don't do it, and Badiou here is no exception. Um, and often they don't do it because we have this very strange belief. And I
mm,
noticed when I was writing the book, I mean, many people said to me, well, how can you write a book on love? Love is indefinable. There's nothing I
yeah.
mean, you shouldn't say anything about it. And I said, why? Would you define, do you think that other emotions are not definable? Do you think hate's not definable? Do you think lust is not definable? Do you think generosity is not definable? Well, no, we don't. Well, so why do you think love?
Mm,
Well, love is indefinable. And people, I have a story about why this has happened, which I can tell you if you're interested, historically,
yes,
how we
please
came
do.
to this very bizarre, completely
Mm,
historically anomalous. So people perhaps don't
mm,
realize that for nearly all of Western history, people very much had theories about what love is and why it gets triggered in some cases and not others. But in the modern
mm,
period, this has become sometimes even taboo. I mean, I had people say to me, around dinner tables, friends, and things like that. They said to me, if you're writing a book on love, that shows you don't understand what love is, because you can't write it's self-defeating. You can't write a book on love. I mean, you can write a
mm,
book on how to have good relationships,
yeah.
right? What's taken, listening and
Mm,
tolerance and so on. But
mm,
you can't write a book. If you write a book on what love actually is that gets it going,
mm,
then that already shows you
mm,
don't understand anything about it. So
mm,
I think this is a fascinating thing about, maybe it's just the modern West, but it's extremely powerful, and it's a kind of feeling that's out there. And I think, the reason I'm going on about this at some length is that, the fact that someone of Badiou's brilliance has left this out of his account is to me a
mm,
symptom that he too
mm,
is a prisoner of our times in that respect. Brilliant though, his philosophy is.
mm. So, Professor, in your theory, so I mean, let me just start with that small context that, we routinely love entities that might not be people. It could be artworks or
Yes,
deities or what have you, rivers, nature,
yes,
where
yes.
probably there is no, probability of reciprocation. So, what does that essentially reveal to us about human longing? What exactly are we longing for?
Well, as I say, I think we're longing for a place in the world.
Hmm.
We're longing for a place in the world that is receptive, more than receptive, that is nurturing of um, our sense of who we want to become, not just who we are now, but who we want to become, who we think we
Hmm.
can become. And
Hmm.
I'm sorry, there's only a limit to how much specificity I can give this, because
Hmm.
our self-knowledge is itself so
Yeah.
limited, and our self-knowledge only develops through such engagement with the world. So we can't say in advance, there's no way you could sit down. So for any of our viewers who think, well, this is a very academic
Hmm.
um, analysis this person's giving, because what do I just sit down, make a list of who I think I am, and then go out and look out for the right person or the right work of art? No, it doesn't work that way. It's very much a dialogical to and forth
Hmm.
that of which we might not be conscious a lot of the time,
Hmm.
and I mean, we might not be conscious of exactly what's going on, but there's a sense, it's maybe only in retrospect that we sense that there's something in us that's flowering, that's opening up, that's
Hmm.
developing through this
Hmm.
sense that we have found a a a loved one. And as you just
Hmm.
recapitulated, could be not just a person, but a work of art or a landscape and so on, that
Hmm.
that speaks to us. And
Hmm.
and there are echoes of there are elements of this that are very mysterious. I mean, I'm deeply attracted, for example, to mountainous landscapes, and within mountainous landscapes, the certain kinds just hit me
Hmm.
hard emotionally. I mean, to the point where I'm deeply, deeply moved, and I simply have no
Yeah.
idea why. I couldn't tell you. Is it the shape of the mountain? It's some kind
Hmm.
of relationship between me and the mountain. You know, that might
Hmm.
sound strange. That
Hmm.
deeply moves me and gives me a sense that this is where I want to, I want to exist in that. I even sometimes think I want to be buried here when the time comes. So
Hmm.
it's a very passionate emotion, very
Hmm.
and I don't quite know why it's the case, but I don't need to know why it's the case. All I need to
Hmm.
know in terms of my own understanding of what love is that
Hmm.
it's here that I feel this sense of a promise of home. Again, to emphasize, the home might not be, you know, a consoling place. I mean, it's consoling
Hmm.
in the sense that it's a place where I can come to fruition, or I feel like I can come to fruition. But it could be, there could be quite a sense of danger, of threat, um, you know, um, and I think people are very attracted, often in love, to danger and threat. Um, that goes back to our
Professor,
discussion on risk.
so is love in that sense is always seeking? Is home always a horizon? Which is always escaping us, or does one actually get there at some point in time?
That's a good point. It's both. It's a
Hmm.
horizon that's always there. So there is no we will never achieve, in my view, just like life just goes on until it doesn't go on, so to speak. Um,
Hmm.
we will never achieve that sense of a final sense of home. We might feel it for a moment, like when those of us who enjoy walking up mountains
Hmm.
will know that you often get to that plateau and you think, I'm nearly at the top,
Hmm.
and then you suddenly see there's
Hmm.
this whole vast amount of mountains still to climb. um
Hmm.
I think that's what it is to seek home in a world that you supremely value. So you'll never, and of course, again, many myths, express this. That there is no. I mean, to come back to it again, the afterlife myth. I mean, it's not like during our lives we ever feel. I mean, those
mm,
people who believe this will ever feel that they're sure to get there. Let
mm,
alone obviously, and by definition, they can't get there while they're in this world. But they don't know if they're
mm,
going to get there. That depends on
mm,
God's will and so on. So I think I'm sorry, there is a vague element to it, but there's a vague. That's the whole point. There is a vague element to what it is to be in the world.
Oh, I
It's there's
absolutely
never a
understand.
sense of I've finally reached
Mm,
harbor,
yes.
except for a temporary sense. If you're, I think if you're honest about it. So it's a
Mm,
lifelong journey that simply ends when life ends, but there's always progress, and there's always progress if you work at it and if you're patient at it.
mm. Professor, if I bring it back to, to more lived experiences, with love or the way we
Those
experience
are
it
lived
or way we
experiences.
understand it. Yeah, it never occurs in a vacuum. It's always socially engineered, encouraged, or constrained. And modern love is deeply entangled with individualism and consumerist culture. So, in
Yes,
what ways do you think has capitalism reshaped what we expect from love?
I think it has enormously reshaped what we expect from love.
Mm.
I should say it's enormously reshaped what we expect from romantic love,
Hmm.
romantic erotic love. So there, it's really created, so to speak, at its worst, if you want us to call it that. Um, I
Hmm.
mean, really a kind of commoditization. It's commoditized love. I mean, the search for sometimes, of course, it's not really love. It's called love, but it's just sexual satisfaction or something, or just the satisfaction of being wanted by someone else briefly until you're bored of them. Um,
Hmm.
I think it has, made that kind of satisfaction into a sort of commodity where we just seek
Hmm.
more and more of it. And then,
Hmm.
when we're bored, because the period of effort has started, or the novelty is worn off, or whatever it is, or someone more appealing comes along. I mean, as in online, you know, dating of some,
Hmm.
of many, many kinds, that is so easy for that to happen. And people are
Yeah.
constantly, staying on dating sites while they're in relationships to see if there's
Yeah.
anyone more appealing. I think, well, there's no
Hmm.
question it has, it has, made it actually much more difficult to, persist in the way we were talking about before, to have the patience to persist through the trouble, through the boredom, through the difficulties. Of course, it has. But I think there's
Hmm.
one other corrective to that, which is important, and people don't mention that. So I think a lot of people have mentioned that, and there's a very fine sociologist called Eva Illouz. Maybe you've interviewed her, but this is a
Hmm.
this is really at the heart of her own. She's written about love as a commodity very, very well,
Hmm.
and I completely agree
Hmm.
with all that. But I think we must,
Hmm.
there is another side to the story, and this is very important because the kind of patience, the kind of patient lifelong love in
Hmm.
our modern world has been transferred from the romantic relationship on the whole, right? I'm not saying in every
Hmm.
case, to the child. And this is something
Hmm.
that isn't spoken about. So if you look at the relationship of parents to children currently, I mean, there has never been a time, to the best of my knowledge,
Hmm.
in Western history when children have been regarded as more important. In fact, I would use the word sacred,
Hmm.
and the primary site of desecration in our world is children. I mean, so desecration is obviously where you abuse what is regarded as sacred, and of course, at one time it was
Hmm.
God and it was the inner sanctum and so on, and
Yeah.
now it's the child. So not
Hmm.
just sexual abuse, but also mental abuse, emotional abuse are absolute
Hmm.
no-nos, and that's a new phenomenon historically. And so I just want to sort of there are two sides to this. One is that romantic love has become this commodity, has become highly commoditized,
Mm,
especially
mm,
for sex, basically, and for novelty.
mm,
And but there is another kind of love that has gone the opposite way and has almost taken over from love for God. I mean, I could go through many of the features of love for God, lifelong
mm,
devotion, sacrifice, by the way. Parents talk all the time about sacrificing for their children. And,
mm,
for many parents, um, I mean, children are their hardest work. I mean, I know parents for
mm,
whom Monday morning is a kind of relief because they get to do a whole week's work in their offices.
mm,
You know what I mean? The
mm,
weekend, one might think of as for rest, but now it's become a
mm,
full-time professional job to look after
mm,
children. I'm not knocking that at all. On the contrary, I'm a child of
mm,
my age as much as the next person there, and I think it's a tremendous advance of our age.
mm,
Only 100 years ago, well, actually less than that, child prostitution was rife in the West. Child murder was rife
mm,
in the West. There was a time at the end of the 19th century when child murder the, the most people who were murdered in London were children and babies.
mm,
This is now
mm,
unimaginable. I mean, child murder these days is one of the most serious crimes that anyone can commit and
mm,
carries the severest punishments, including social
mm.
ostracization, which is also what happens when you desecrate the sacred. So I just want to say, mention a corrective to the idea that modern love has become just a question of, has become trivialized and commoditized. It has in one area, but in another area, the opposite has happened.
Mm. So, do you think, Professor? I mean, I would think the way you define love, there would be certain resilience to structural forces in love, or or not.
When you say structural forces, you mean what?
As in capitalism, or as in
Ah,
caste, culture,
definitely. Oh, I mean, without
nationalities,
without without question, without
race.
question. I mean, I
Yeah.
meant absolutely. I
Mm,
mean, the 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 ascendancy of, as I say, the parental child relationship to the sacred love relationship is undoubtedly
mm,
a social thing. And as I just mentioned,
mm,
I'm as much a, I believe in that as much as the next person. I think, it's now
mm,
um, undoubtedly. I think I mentioned another thing before, which is that the mere fact that love has been regarded as unconditional, didn't
mm,
use that word, but the mere fact that love has been regarded as indefinable is itself another social
mm,
development that's occurred in the last 200 years in that case.
mm,
And I think every period has its own valuation of love as a whole, has its own broad conception of what love is, or its
mm,
belief that love can't be defined, as I say, and has its own understanding of what the supreme objects of love are. I mean, clearly for many centuries it was God, and then there was a time in the Romantic period when it was nature, and then it was art, and there've been many different objects have been raised to the level of the supreme. All those things, in my view, um,
mm,
are social movements, and
mm.
none of us are entirely independent thinkers. I mean, that's simply not possible. Yeah, and love being so central to our culture is obviously going to be no exception to that. Yeah.
Professor, in this context, so in a world which is right now marked by war, genocide, mass displacement, and pretty much systematic erasure of the other, how does love survive that? Or what is the supreme object of love in a world? How do we speak of love in such a world?
Well, I think how we speak of love in such a world is that, but this is a continuation of what's happened over the last
Mm,
2 centuries. I think
mm,
since the Industrial Revolution, as mentioned at the very beginning, is that love is becoming
mm,
ever more private. Um,
mm,
Love is becoming ever more private, and as people, it's not just that people are demoralized by what they see in the social realm, though I think your question is very,
Mm,
very well motivated. But I think in a sense, it also works the other way around, that the social realm is, in a sense, becoming more violent, partly because love has been, we've privatized almost all our lives in so many ways. I mean, we live more and more in our
mm,
own little worlds, as it were. But then, you do so. I mean, love for humanity, although it's much spoken about, I think is, sadly on the decline at the moment. But then you see completely extraordinary acts of, I mean, they're both heroism, but actually it's a form of universal love, where yesterday
mm.
we're talking on now on December the 15th, 2025, and yesterday was the massacre on the beach in Australia. And you see,
Australia,
at least judging by his name, you see a Muslim man willing to sacrifice his life to save
his own life. Yeah.
Jews on the
Mm,
beach.
yes.
And obviously, I think the whole world has been deeply moved. And I mean, the video is complete, and I'm sure you've seen it, is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he's currently in
Mm,
hospital, but he's lucky to be alive. So he was
yeah.
willing to sacrifice his life, for a completely different group,
Yes.
and they're
Mm,
currently in many ways at loggerheads, as we know. So, I think that's an example of
mm,
true, it's not just heroism, it is heroism, but it's true love for humanity without distinction of race and color and so on.
mm,
And
mm,
it's incredibly reassuring that, this person deserves to become a worldwide, you know,
mm,
hero, and I think he is. But
mm,
so, I mean, in a sense, we've lost a lot of that because people think, oh, why should I take a risk, and that's someone else's business and so on.
mm.
And love has become, on the whole, very privatized.
Mm.
Yeah.
So even in private settings, love can be, can show its pathological forms, whether
Oh,
it is
definitely.
narcissistic love, obsessive love, and it can be quite tyrannical. So, love that kind of pretty much destroys rather than reveals. So, how do you make sense of that?
Well, there are two things I would say. I mean, two ways broad ways I would make sense of it. I mean, one is that obviously, you know, we find it very difficult to be, I mean, we are impatient, we are selfish, we are intolerant of people's difference. I mean, everyone, I think, has an element of that.
Mm,
Almost nobody has none of that. Um, but I think at the same time, there's another, and I think that, that will infect relationships, even where they're, as it were, making real progress, so to speak. I mean, even where they're healthy
mm,
otherwise, there's always an element of
mm,
unhealthiness, or almost always. Um, but I think, destructiveness is unfortunately a deeper feature of love, because fear is the one of the precursors of destructiveness. And
mm,
the fear is really almost inevitable in love, precisely when it's genuine, because of the fear of loss that will always be there, even if you're not conscious of it.
mm.
And
Yeah.
obviously, we know from infant psychology that that's true in the baby.
Mm,
From the moment they become at all conscious
mm,
of their mother as a separate being.
mm,
Psychoanalysts say, when they realize that the breast can be removed as well, it's not always there, and so on. That there's an unreliability to human relationship that is
mm,
inevitable, precisely for the bad
mm,
you reason that you remain two separate people, and even the mother,
mm,
is still a separate person. And
mm,
I think, when we obviously, by the time we've grown up, we realize that everybody is potentially separate, that people are very difficult to get to know, however well you think you
mm,
know them, and that potentially they could disappear at any time, or even if they don't physically disappear, that they could emotionally disappear. And I
mm,
think, fear is therefore always in the background. and that's one kind of fear. Let me mention another
Mm,
kind of fear, which I think is a very mysterious one, but it's precisely fear of success and fear of becoming yourself. I think
mm,
we all want, I really find this very hard to express, I must say, but I think we all, and I think it's a reason, by the way, for procrastinating in life. I mean, on a completely separate note, and I've written about that too. I think that
mm,
we all have a certain fear of becoming real to ourselves, of becoming,
mm,
not of becoming successful in the world necessarily, and praised and admired and what have you, although some
mm,
people have a real fear of success. But I think we often have a fear of becoming ourselves in some way, of really coming to fully be ourselves, and of therefore appearing real to ourselves. Now, maybe some of our viewers will think, what on earth is he talking about? This is total nonsense. And,
mm,
maybe for them it is nonsense. And maybe they're free of that. But I don't. I do think it's a very powerful phenomenon, and precisely when love is successful, and it does
mm,
give you this grounding that enables you to flourish and become who you are, to become more and more
mm,
defined as who you are,
mm,
that can be very frightening. So it's not just the fear of loss; it's also the fear and a sense of gain. it's a fear of it's a fear
mm,
of you. I think there's an element in which we all like to remain a little vague to ourselves, a
mm,
little, you know, maybe even a little childlike, a little regressive, and
mm,
stuck in, you know, maybe because we're afraid of change. I don't think it's there. It is just change. I think there's a certain fear of, becoming, um, dare I say, mature, becoming,
mm,
really discovering who you are and
mm,
taking the bold steps needed to just pursue who you are. We talk a lot about self fulfillment and so on,
mm,
but I think we have a lot of fear of the real thing, not of satisfaction, but of real self fulfillment. Um,
mm,
as I say, I struggle with how to put that into words because I'm
mm,
really not clear myself, but I do feel that
mm,
there is something there and I think that could be another reason for fearing love. And the reason I'm talking so much about fear is because you asked about destructiveness. So there's the
mm,
destructiveness, which is just, impatience,
mm,
irritation
mm,
with the other, and so on. And, we destroy things because it's just too much hard work. In a sense, that's very
mm,
true, but it's the less interesting one to me because it's just
mm,
obvious. The one that's not
mm,
so obvious is the what I is the fear of actually success in love. And
mm,
success is partly measured by, this sense of
mm,
becoming who we are through love. Um, and so we become destructive in order simply to destroy, in order to avoid that fear, in order to get out of it.
mm.
Hope that
Right.
doesn't sound
Professor,
too mysterious or
no, no,
abstract.
no, it's very Lacanian, I suppose, in one,
Yes,
uh,
in some ways it
yeah.
is.
It is. Professor, but as you've argued, then your love is bound to vulnerability, this fear of loss, the possibility of loss and finitude. But, and if that is true, what does it mean to ask whether AI or artificial intelligence could ever love? Because does love require consciousness or mortality or the capacity for existential risk? Or
Great
is it
question.
even a valid question? Yeah.
I think it's a great question. Yes. I mean, of course,
Mm,
you know, we all, I mean, it's very early days. ChatGPT, I think, has
mm,
existed for exactly 2 years now. Maybe
yeah.
it's three, but I think it's two. I mean, it's
Mm,
unbelievably brief. God
mm,
knows where we'll be in 100 years. or even in 10 years.
Mm,
So we don't really know what it is that we're asking about yet. But
mm,
I think I, I think you just put your finger on one point, which is that, one of the, I mean, absolutely, perhaps the most crucial
mm,
element in to living life is the
mm,
knowledge that we'll die. I think that
mm,
is that existential vulnerability, that
mm.
existence, is fundamentally, however secure we are in life, our existence is going to come to an end, at least
Yeah.
our worldly existence. I think just
Mm,
is the most profound of all the
mm,
motivations we have to seek more than mere comfort, to be on the search for the kind of things that you are in your, in your
mm,
podcasts, and the kind of themes you explore. And, we all in some ways are in our own ways. And
mm,
if AI, you know, doesn't die, and even more
mm,
importantly, doesn't have the experience, the whatever, the
mm,
actual subjective experience that it's going to die, there's really no choice in the matter.
mm,
Even if we find a way for living, human beings find a way for living for 200 years, I mean, then they'll die over 200 years. Um, you know, I think that the very search, certainly in terms of my own understanding of love, the very search
mm,
for, the groundedness in some world,
mm,
this world, another world,
mm,
whatever, um, is, you know, centrally bound up with the knowledge that we'll die. And that is that it's then over. There's nothing, at least to our bodies, anymore.
mm,
And, that's one thing. But yes, I think this is again where it matters so much what you think love is. So, for example, if
mm,
you go with Plato, let's say, I mean, Plato
mm,
in one of his dialogues called the Symposium, and one of
mm,
the speakers in the Symposium, who is generally taken to be the one that Plato endorses, love is
mm,
grounded in a perception of beauty. I don't believe this, but
mm,
obviously it's been extremely influential, not just in Western
mm,
history, Islamic history, Sufism, and so on.
mm,
Eh, then I think it is even conceivable that AI could love. I can imagine that AI could,
mm,
using contemporary standards of beauty, say, or some standards of beauty, which it
mm,
picks up or is programmed with, that it could
mm,
perceive this beauty in an object and thereby love it.
mm,
However, on my theory of love, where love is a
mm.
deeply existential emotion, I don't
Yeah.
think AI can love, uh, as
Mm,
in terms of the kind of understanding. Maybe it could even love
mm,
on Aristotle's theory of love, which is that it's grounded in a perception of similar virtues of character. So it might. So there, the answer might
mm,
would be, well, maybe it can love. Maybe it can simply perceive
mm,
whatever virtues I have, decide that those virtues are ones it's attracted to and love me for that. But if love is
mm,
grounded in ontological insecurity, in existential insecurity, in the fundamental
mm,
human circumstances, in other words, of loss and incompleteness, which is ultimately, as I
mm,
said, a loss of life itself, in other words, of death,
mm,
then I
mm,
don't think that it can, unless we get to a point where AI becomes a machine
mm,
that can experience suffering, loss, existential anxiety, risk,
mm,
and in some sense, the knowledge of death. I mean, maybe it can be programmed to
mm,
do that, and to have a sense of its the incompleteness of its life,
mm.
in some way. Um, so, my answer would be, on my theory of love, very unlikely, unless it can be programmed to be an
Mm.
existentially aware AI. And only time will tell if that happens. Yeah.
Right. So in the end, I just want to ask, after decades of thinking, writing, and living with these ideas, has your understanding of love become more simpler or endlessly more complex? Do you still think through these ideas every day? Or
I actually do think through these ideas because for some reason that I haven't figured out,
hmm,
they deeply matter to me. And,
hmm,
I would always, anything I think, I would always have a question mark over. Is it, I'm always willing to
yeah.
change it. But I do feel,
Hmm, hmm,
yeah, I do think about these things all the time. And I do also, I can't help but be assaulted by them in many circumstances. So, for example, when
hmm,
somebody who I was very close to was dying and I was there in
hmm,
hospital, um, and who frankly hadn't been extremely kind to me always. On
hmm,
the contrary, had been actually quite cruel in some ways. But
hmm,
there was a very deep relationship, and I did feel
hmm,
deep love for her. Um, and when I saw her there, I felt this overwhelming love for her, and I did ask myself, "What is this about?" Well, it certainly
hmm,
wasn't with Plato for her beauty of
hmm,
character, or in any other sense. It certainly wasn't with Aristotle because we shared similar virtues of character. It was because
hmm,
she had played a fundamental role in grounding my life. I can only call it that. I felt this almost
hmm,
earth in which I had planted part of my soul in her,
hmm,
and and then that was a very powerful moment. It wasn't the kind of I wasn't standing back and
hmm,
reflecting, maybe some of your
hmm,
viewers might think, in a sort of like a philosopher. It just hit me, and I thought, well, that's
hmm,
confirmation of, for me anyway, right now, of how I think about love, because none of the theories of love, so to speak, I've heard explain, felt right at that moment. That was a very
hmm,
personal moment. But I
hmm,
mean, if yeah, I do always think. I think, I can't help thinking. Maybe again, I'm just a creature of my time, but that love is, you know, perhaps the most central and necessary emotion in life that makes everything else possible in some way.
hmm,
So I'm just motivated to keep thinking about it. And I think that it's a very problematic thing. I mean, we've by no means, I think it's something that I also think, by the way, it's extremely historically situated. So, I'm living right
hmm,
now. I'm not living in ancient
hmm,
Greece. I'm not living in the medieval times. I'm living right now. And I'm also somebody who's inevitably feels, a certain sense of uprootedness, or of, the,
hmm,
Marx's point about all that solid melts into air. I feel a sense of the precariousness different to what people in previous centuries felt, when they didn't get enough food to eat or when they were exposed to the elements. But I feel a sense of ontological precariousness, and therefore I
hmm,
can't help stop thinking about it. But I'm always open to, I'm just wrong. I think one
hmm.
has to be.
So do you think, with all the languages that we possess today, I mean, be it music or words, do you think there is another kind of language other than words that is perhaps more suited to express the idea of love or to understand it better?
I think, oddly, words are really necessary. I mean, I wouldn't have known
Hmm,
how to, maybe that's just because they're my tools of my trade, but I wouldn't have known how to really describe what I feel
hmm,
if it were
hmm,
just left to wordless means. So, in terms of music or dance, I think you can express a huge amount in definitely in music or dance. Um,
hmm.
I mean, I happen to love the music of Wagner,
Or
which is,
perhaps poetry more than philosophy,
well,
more than.
those are words. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, well,
Yeah.
without doubt. I mean, I think, yes. I
Hmm,
mean, poetry
hmm,
obviously is a medium of words, but I think
hmm,
poetry is probably the supreme way you could
hmm,
express everything. But, I don't have sufficient talent. And, my dispositions lie
hmm,
more in philosophy, but
hmm,
or maybe there isn't a supreme way. I mean, we all have something to contribute, and the philosophers have contributed centrally
hmm,
to the
mm,
ways in which people have thought about love over the centuries, and maybe more than the
mm,
poets have. I mean, Nietzsche was very rude about artists
mm,
in that he said,
mm,
they're always valets. That's the English translation.
mm,
They're always valets of what the
mm,
philosophers say. But then I guess, he had
mm,
a professional maybe interest in saying that. But I think,
mm,
no, I think philosophers can set, or at least,
mm,
they can make explicit certain, frameworks and guidelines. The poets
mm,
have a much more powerful means at their disposal for putting those guidelines into the most
mm,
evocative, perhaps most beautiful
mm,
terms. But I
mm,
think, and of course, ideally, we wouldn't have these separations between these fields. I mean, they're different
mm,
ways of giving voice to what we
mm,
experience in life. And
mm,
yeah,
mm,
so I think they are ideal. We have too many walls these days between different disciplines. I mean,
mm,
if only life would be long enough, we would be studying everything, as it were, all the
mm.
time. But it's unfortunately not.
Yeah, that's true. But Professor Hawkins said at the end of this conversation, while I understand the idea of grounding more, but uh, I also understand that grounding is something which is so elusive. The more grounded I want to feel, the more adrift I feel. So, but thank you so much for, helping us face love's unruliness without flinching. Thank you
Really
so
enjoyed
much
the
for this
conversation.
conversation.
Thank you.